Ethan awoke to a sky that glowed with two suns, their light sharp and blinding on the rough alien terrain. His body ached from the long journey across the barren plains, and his clothes were torn from the jagged rocks he had climbed. On his home planet, he had been considered normal, maybe even strong. But here, he felt like a fragile insect among giants. The world he had landed on was unlike anything he had imagined. Towering trees with thick metal-like bark stretched to the sky, their leaves glittering in colors humans had no names for. Rivers ran thick with a liquid that shimmered like molten silver. And the air was alive with the calls of creatures whose voices could split stone. Ethan stumbled over a root as he moved cautiously through the forest, every sense alert. He had no weapons, no armor, only his mind and his determination to survive. The first hours after landing had been terrifying. He had nearly fallen into a pit that seemed to appear out of nowhere, narrowly escaping sharp spikes hidden in the shadows. That moment had taught him quickly. On this planet, strength alone would not save him. Only wits and speed mattered. As he climbed a ridge to catch his breath, he noticed movement below. Shadows shifted between the trees, large, deliberate movements that made him freeze. He squinted against the light and his stomach dropped. They were watching him. A group of aliens, taller than any human he had ever seen, stepped into view. They had sleek, muscular bodies, arms long and powerful, and faces shaped like both predator and noble warrior. These were the Varkari, the dominant species of the planet. They moved with a grace that was almost threatening, their eyes sharp and assessing. Ethan's heart pounded. He knew from what little he had observed that the Varkari valued power above all else. Weakness was laughed at. Frailty was a joke. And here he was, a human, small, fragile, and completely defenseless in comparison. One of the Varkari, larger and more commanding than the others, stepped forward. Its voice was low and resonant, a sound that vibrated through the ground. "Look at this creature," it said. "It moves like a child, thinks like a child. How did it come so far into our world?" The others laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made Ethan flinch. He felt every eye on him, measuring, judging, expecting failure. His instinct was to run, to disappear into the forest, but he knew that would not save him forever. The Varkari were too fast, too smart, and too curious to let him go so easily. Ethan forced himself to stand tall, despite shaking from fear. I am not looking for trouble," he said, his voice quivering. "I only want to survive." The Varkari laughed again, louder this time, their amusement sharp as claws. "Survive?" the leader said. "You, this human? Your bones would break under our weakest predator. You are nothing." Ethan's stomach sank, but he forced himself not to show despair. He had learned a long time ago that fear was a weapon his enemies could use against him. If he showed fear, he would die. He had to be clever. He had to be careful. As if on cue, a growl rumbled through the forest, a sound so deep it seemed to shake the air itself. The Varkari froze, their sharp ears twitching. From the shadows emerged a massive creature, taller than the tallest Varkari, muscles rippling beneath sleek, dark scales. Its eyes glowed with a fiery intelligence, and every step it took made the ground tremble. This was Kale, the champion predator of the Varkari. Every Varkari knew Kale's reputation. No hunter had ever matched him in strength or skill. He was feared, respected, and untouchable. And now he was approaching Ethan. The Varkari stepped back, giving the predator space, their mockery replaced with awe. Ethan, on the other hand, froze entirely. Kale's gaze met his, and it was not just hunger Ethan saw. It was curiosity, intelligence, and a terrifying awareness that made him feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Kale moved slowly at first, testing Ethan's reactions. Ethan did not run. He could not. His only chance was to rely on his mind, not his body. He quickly scanned the terrain around him, noting the rocks, the roots, the small crevices where he could hide or escape. The predator growled again, a low, warning sound. Ethan took a deep breath and moved toward a cluster of jagged rocks. Kale followed without haste, every movement measured, patient. The human's heart raced as he ducked behind the rocks, hoping to buy time. Then an idea struck him. He remembered a plant he had noticed earlier. Its leaves released a sticky, slippery sap when crushed. If he could lure Kale onto the patch of plants, perhaps the predator would lose traction, giving Ethan a chance to escape. It was a dangerous plan, but it was all he had. Ethan crept carefully across the forest floor, trying to remain as silent as possible. Kale's eyes followed every step, unblinking and unrelenting. The predator's tail swept the ground like a pendulum, and Ethan could hear the air shift with every movement. His pulse thundered in his ears, but he forced himself to stay focused. Finally, he reached the patch of sticky plants. He crushed the leaves beneath his feet, releasing the sap, and waited. Kyle stepped into the area, and almost immediately his massive claws slipped. The predator stumbled, surprised by the human's clever trick. Ethan seized the moment and ran. The Varkari watched in shock and disbelief as the tiny human evaded the most feared predator on their planet. Their laughter had died, replaced by murmurs of confusion. How could something so small, so weak, outsmart Kale, the unbeatable champion? Ethan did not pause to think about that. He ran, dodging roots and leaping over jagged rocks, his mind racing with calculations and escape routes. Kale regained balance quickly, but he did not attack immediately. Instead, he observed, noting the human's agility, his cleverness, and above all, his courage. By the time night fell, Ethan had found a small cave to rest in. He was exhausted, his body trembling from fear and adrenaline, but he had survived. Kale had not followed him into the cave. Somehow, the predator had chosen to retreat, but Ethan knew it was only temporary. The creature would return. As he sat in the cave, Ethan thought about the Varkari and their scornful words. They had laughed at him, mocked him, assumed he would die easily, but he had survived. And in doing so, he realized something important. This planet did not reward strength alone. It rewarded cleverness, courage, and the will to keep moving forward. The night was long, and the cave offered little comfort. Strange noises echoed from the forest, cries of alien animals, the rustle of unseen creatures, and the occasional distant roar of Kale. Ethan did not sleep. He could not afford to. Instead, he planned. He had to find a way to live, not just survive a day or two, but for weeks, months, maybe even longer. In the darkness, he made a vow to himself. He would not be just another weak human scorned by the Varkari. He would survive, and if possible, he would show them that even the smallest and frailest human could earn respect. The dawn broke over the alien forest, casting long shadows that danced across the rocky terrain. Ethan emerged from the cave, ready to face another day. He knew Kale would return, and he welcomed the challenge. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also an opportunity. Somewhere deep in the forest, Kale watched from the shadows. The predator's glowing eyes followed Ethan's movements, silently acknowledging the human's cleverness and determination. For the first time, Kale did not see a fragile meal. He saw something else. Potential. And that potential would change everything. Ethan had survived his first encounter, but the real trials were just beginning. The Varkari's scorn was still fresh, the forest still dangerous, and Kale's attention still fixed on him. Yet for the first time since arriving on this world, Ethan felt a spark of hope. He was weak, yes, but he was alive. And being alive here meant he still had a chance to prove himself. The story of the fragile human among giants had begun, and Ethan was determined that it would not be a story of failure. The sun rose again over the alien forest, painting the jagged trees in golden light. Ethan was already awake, crouched on a rocky ledge, surveying the terrain below. He had survived his first day, but he knew it would not get easier. The forest was alive with danger, and Kale, the champion predator, was still watching. Ethan moved cautiously, making small, calculated steps over the rocky ground. He had learned to observe every detail: the position of roots, the movement of shadows, the pattern of the strange, glittering river. Survival on this planet required attention, and Ethan had become a careful student of his surroundings. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement among the trees. Kale emerged, stepping lightly despite his massive size. The predator's glowing eyes locked on Ethan immediately, and his presence sent a chill down the human's spine. Yet Ethan did not run. He understood that running would only provoke Kale's hunt instinct. Instead, he held his ground, keeping his movements small and deliberate. Kyle stopped a few meters away, his claws digging lightly into the soil. He tilted his head, studying Ethan. There was no immediate attack, no growl of warning, only the weight of Kale's gaze. Assessing, calculating, testing. Ethan swallowed hard and spoke, his voice trembling slightly. I mean no harm. I just want to survive. The predator remained silent, but his eyes never left the human. Then, almost imperceptibly, Kale moved closer. circling Ethan slowly. Every step was deliberate, testing his reactions. Ethan had to think fast. He could not rely on strength. He had none. But he had wits. Scanning the area, Ethan noticed a fallen log covered in sharp, pointed leaves. He had an idea. He edged toward it carefully, trying to make it look like an accidental movement. Kyle followed, unhurried, every muscle in his body tense and ready. As he reached the log, Ethan tripped slightly, causing a small cascade of leaves to fall to the ground. Kyle paused, sniffing the air, his head tilting curiously. Ethan darted to the other side, forcing the predator to adjust, keeping him moving. Kale's growl was low and questioning, not threatening yet. Ethan realized something remarkable. The predator was not attacking recklessly. He was testing Ethan, gauging his intelligence, observing how he reacted under pressure. Ethan's mind raced. He could not afford to make a mistake. One wrong move and Kale could crush him in an instant. He noticed a small depression in the ground, a pit hidden under a thin layer of leaves. He lured Kale toward it, hoping the predator's massive weight would cause him to stumble. Kale stepped carefully, sensing the trap immediately. But instead of falling, he adjusted, landing with precision. Ethan's heart pounded. He had underestimated the predator's intelligence. Kale was not just strong. He was clever, almost as clever as Ethan himself. The human realized he had to change strategy. Direct confrontation was impossible. Survival required patience, observation, and quick thinking. Ethan remembered the shimmering river nearby, whose liquid made the ground slippery. If he could lead Kale across it carefully, he might create a small advantage. Ethan started moving toward the river, keeping Kale's attention focused on him. The predator followed silently, his glowing eyes never leaving the human. When Ethan reached the riverbank, he took a deep breath and made a small, calculated slip. His foot slid into the liquid, splashing slightly. Kale adjusted immediately, but Ethan noticed something. The predator's footing was slightly less sure on the slick surface. It was a small advantage, but enough for Ethan to dart away a few meters. Kale's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with interest. For hours, the chase continued. Not a chase to kill, but a test. Ethan lured Kale through narrow valleys, over jagged rocks, and along slippery riverbanks. He used every trick he knew, quick thinking, observation, and clever distractions to stay alive. The predator adapted just as quickly, forcing Ethan to innovate constantly. By midday, both human and predator were exhausted, though Kale's stamina far surpassed Ethan's. Yet Ethan had survived each test. He had used his mind, his awareness, and his courage to navigate challenges that the Varkari would assume impossible for a human. Finally, Ethan collapsed behind a boulder, gasping for breath. Kale approached slowly, stepping over him, and then stopped, standing nearby without aggression. The predator's glowing eyes studied him closely, and Ethan realized something incredible. Kale was impressed. The Varkari, who had been observing from a distance, were silent. They had expected their champion to end the human's life within minutes. Yet here he was, still alive, still clever, still standing despite the challenges. Their ridicule turned into quiet astonishment. Kale's growl changed, a deep, resonant sound that felt almost like approval. Ethan looked up, unsure what it meant. Slowly, the predator leaned down, sniffing him, testing him in a way that felt strangely protective rather than threatening. Ethan froze, uncertain whether to move. Then Kale made a sound that was unlike anything Ethan had ever heard. It was a low, rumbling purr, almost gentle. The predator turned and walked a few steps away, then stopped and looked back at the human. It was as if Kale was signaling, "You are not like the others. You are clever. You survive." Ethan realized the truth. Kale was not just a predator. He was a teacher, a judge, a challenger. He had tested Ethan and found him worthy, not in terms of strength, but in terms of intelligence, courage, and heart. As the sun began to set, Ethan and Kale remained in the forest together, a strange understanding forming between them. Ethan still knew the Varkari scorned him, and he still faced dangers at every turn. But he also knew he had earned the attention of the deadliest creature on the planet, a bond that could change everything. That night, Ethan rested under the safety of a rocky overhang. Kyle stayed nearby, a silent guardian in the shadows. For the first time since arriving on this alien world, Ethan felt a sense of possibility. Perhaps being fragile was not a weakness after all. Perhaps survival depended not on size or strength, but on courage, intelligence, and the ability to adapt. Ethan thought of the Varkari and their scornful words. They had mocked him, laughed at him, assumed he would fail. But he had survived Kale's test. He had faced the ultimate predator on this planet and lived. That alone was proof that he was more than they expected. The forest around him was alive with sounds, strange cries, rustling leaves, distant roars. But for the first time, Ethan did not feel helpless. He had learned something vital. Survival was about using every tool available, including one's mind, instincts, and even the guidance of a creature far more powerful than oneself. In the darkness, Kale watched him silently, his eyes glowing faintly. There was respect in that gaze, and perhaps even a hint of curiosity. The predator had seen the human's potential, and that acknowledgement was more valuable than any weapon or strength Ethan could possess. The chapter closed with the human and the predator side by side, two very different beings, bound by the unspoken understanding that the smallest and weakest could survive in ways the strongest could not. Ethan's journey had only begun, but the first test was complete. He had proven that even a fragile human could stand against the greatest dangers of the alien world, and live to tell the tale. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and perhaps new allies or enemies. But tonight, Ethan allowed himself a small, rare moment of pride. He was still weak, still small, still fragile, but he had faced the impossible and survived, and that survival was just the beginning. The morning light broke over the alien forest in pale, shifting rays. Ethan stretched, wincing as sore muscles reminded him of the long hours spent evading Kale and navigating the treacherous terrain. His body was tired, but his mind was sharper than ever. He knew that survival here demanded more than strength. It demanded strategy, observation, and courage. Kale was already awake, lying in the shadows of a massive tree. The predator's glowing eyes followed Ethan as he moved, unblinking and watchful. Despite the human's small size, Kale sensed something unusual, a determination, a cleverness, a spirit that did not yield. Kale had hunted many prey across this world, but none had survived as long or had reacted as intelligently to his tests as this human. Ethan glanced at the massive predator, feeling a mixture of fear and awe, but he no longer saw Kale purely as a threat. Instead, he recognized the predator's curiosity, almost respect. Kale was not attacking him. He was observing, learning, and in some unspoken way guiding him. Ethan moved cautiously toward the forest's edge, scanning the ground for food and shelter. Kyle rose silently behind him, moving with a grace that made even a human's quick reflexes seem slow. Ethan did not startle. He had learned that sudden movements could provoke the predator. He simply continued, thinking carefully about each step. Over the next few days, Ethan and Kale developed a rhythm, an unspoken dance of survival. Kale would sometimes appear at moments of extreme danger, silently diverting threats that Ethan could not handle alone. He saved Ethan from sudden ambushes of alien predators, intervened when the human stepped on unstable rocks, and guided him away from poisonous plants with subtle gestures. Ethan noticed these interventions and began to understand them as more than chance. Kale was teaching him without words, showing him the ways of this harsh world. And in turn, Ethan learned to anticipate Kale's movements, to respect the predator's strength while staying clever enough to survive alongside him. One day, while navigating a narrow canyon filled with sharp, jagged rocks, Ethan spotted a strange alien plant glowing faintly in the shadows. Its sap seemed dangerous, yet potentially useful. Kale approached silently, watching the human's reaction closely. Ethan knelt beside the plant, carefully testing its properties. When a small puff of sap shot toward him, he dodged quickly and laughed softly. Kale tilted his head as if amused by the human's cleverness. "Not all humans are fragile," Ethan whispered, mostly to himself. "Some of us can survive, if we're smart enough." Kale growled softly, almost as if in agreement. The sound resonated through the canyon, echoing off the jagged walls. Ethan paused, realizing again that the predator did not see him as prey anymore. Kale was observing his mind, judging his cleverness rather than his weakness. Meanwhile, word of Ethan's survival began to ripple through the Varkari. Scouts had noticed him evading Kull, surviving in areas where even their strongest hunters struggled. The council of elite warriors murmured in disbelief. How could a human, so small and fragile, managed to navigate their world so skillfully. Some scoffed, insisting it was a fluke. Others watched with cautious curiosity, wondering if there was more to this human than anyone had realized. Ethan did not know the Varkari were talking about him. He focused only on the next challenge, surviving the day, finding food, and staying ahead of the dangers hidden in the alien forest. But he could feel it, something was changing. Kale's presence was no longer a threat. It was a shield, a guide, and a test all at once. One afternoon, Ethan found himself facing a river that glowed with a strange, silvery liquid. Its current was swift, and the rocks along the banks were slippery and sharp. He studied the river carefully, trying to figure out the safest crossing. Kale appeared beside him silently, his glowing eyes scanning the same river. The predator's stance suggested both caution and readiness. Ethan had an idea. He spotted a narrow, jagged branch extending across the river. If he moved carefully, balancing along the branch, he could cross without falling into the dangerous liquid. He gestured subtly toward the branch, testing Kale's reaction. To his surprise, Kale stepped closer and lowered his massive body, signaling in his own way that he would help if needed. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped onto the branch, his balance unsteady. The branch creaked and water splashed below, but Kale remained steady at the riverbank watching. A slip would be disastrous, yet Ethan's mind worked quickly, calculating each movement. Inch by inch he crossed, feeling the predator's eyes on him, guiding him with subtle movements. When he finally reached the other side, he turned to see Kale nod slightly, almost approvingly. It was the first time Ethan felt a true sense of connection with Kale. The predator was no longer a test, no longer a threat. He was a partner, in a way that transcended species. And in that moment, Ethan understood something vital. Survival here depended not just on strength or cunning alone, but on the alliances one could forge, even with creatures far stronger than oneself. As the days passed, Ethan's confidence grew. He learned to read the forest, to anticipate threats, and to navigate the alien world with increasing skill. Kale remained his silent companion, intervening only when necessary, watching with keen interest as Ethan proved his worth. But the Varkari were not blind to these changes. Scouts reported back to the council, describing the human's clever maneuvers, his resourcefulness, and the strange bond forming with Kale. The council was intrigued, though some remained skeptical. Humans were weak by their standards, creatures that should not survive in the harshest parts of the world. Yet this one had, and he had survived alongside Kale, the ultimate predator. Ethan did not seek recognition or approval from the Varkari. He focused only on living, on learning, and on surviving the day. But he could feel their eyes on him, and he could sense their growing curiosity. The human who had been scorned and dismissed was now being observed with something resembling respect. One evening, as the twin suns set behind the jagged peaks, Ethan and Kyle rested in a small clearing. The predator lay near him, his massive body a protective presence. Ethan studied Kale, marveling at the creature's intelligence and grace. "You're not like the others, are you?" Ethan whispered softly. Kale's eyes glowed faintly in response, and the predator let out a low rumble, almost like an answer. It was a sound that conveyed understanding, respect, and perhaps even trust. For the first time since arriving on this world, Ethan felt that he belonged, not because of strength or size, but because he had earned recognition in a way the Varkari did not expect. He had survived the impossible, and he had done so with courage, cleverness, and heart. As night fell, the forest came alive with alien sounds, the cries of predators, the rustle of unseen creatures, and the occasional roar of Kale as he tested the perimeter. Ethan stayed close to the predator, understanding that their bond, though unspoken, was vital. Kale had chosen to protect him, to guide him, and in return, Ethan had proven that even a fragile human could rise to challenges far beyond what anyone expected. The Varkari, watching from afar, could not deny what they were seeing. Their champion predator, feared by all, had acknowledged the human's cleverness and resilience. Whispers spread among their ranks. This human might be something extraordinary, something beyond mere flesh and weakness. Ethan did not yet know what the future held, but he understood one thing clearly. Kale had become more than a predator. He was a teacher, a guide, and perhaps even a friend. And together, human and predator would face the challenges of this alien world side by side. The story of the fragile human was no longer one of fear and scorn. It had evolved into a tale of cleverness, courage, and the forming of unlikely bonds. Ethan was learning that strength came in many forms, and that even the smallest and most fragile could survive and even thrive when they had the courage to adapt and the heart to persist. And so, as the night deepened and the alien stars shone overhead, Ethan and Cale remained together in the forest. Two very different beings, united not by blood or species, but by respect, understanding, and the shared will to survive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and perhaps even new allies or enemies. But tonight, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of calm. He had survived the Predator's tests. He had proven his mind, his courage, and his spirit, and in doing so, he had taken the first steps towards something extraordinary, a bond that could change the course of his life on this alien world forever. Ethan awoke to a different kind of morning. The forest around him was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it knew something important was about to happen. Kyle, his massive companion, stirred nearby, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The bond between human and predator had grown stronger, unspoken but undeniable. Ethan trusted Cale, and Cale had learned to respect the cleverness and courage of this fragile human. Today, however, was different. Scouts of the Varkari had reported Ethan's continued survival, and the Council had decided that the human must prove himself officially. He would face the elite hunters, the strongest, smartest, and most deadly warriors of the Varkari civilization. This trial was designed to test strength, intelligence, and adaptability, and no human had ever survived it. Ethan felt a mixture of fear and determination. He knew the odds were against him, yet he also understood that he had something the Varkari did not fully appreciate: human ingenuity. While the hunters relied on raw power, Ethan relied on observation, quick thinking, and his ability to adapt to any situation. The clearing was vast, surrounded by jagged cliffs and thick alien vegetation. Ethan stepped forward, the Varkari Council observing from above on a rocky ledge. The elite hunters approached, their bodies muscular, their movements precise, and their eyes sharp. They towered over him, laughing at his small frame. "Do you truly expect to survive here, human?" one of the hunters sneered, his voice resonating with amusement. "You are fragile, you are weak. This will be your end." Ethan did not reply. Words would not save him. Instead, he focused on the environment, the cliffs, the trees, the rocky outcrops that could offer cover, and the peculiar shapes of the alien plants that might help him survive. His mind worked quickly, forming strategies, predicting movements, and planning multiple paths for escape or advantage. Cale remained in the shadows, massive and silent, watching the human closely. The predator's presence was invisible to most, but it gave Ethan a small, comforting sense of support. Cale had saved him before, and he would again if necessary. The trial began with a sudden challenge. A massive alien beast bred for strength and aggression was released into the clearing. Its scales shimmered, and its claws dug deep into the soil. The elite hunters immediately sprang into action, showing off their skills as they dodged, leapt, and attacked the creature with practiced precision. Ethan, smaller and weaker than all of them, felt the eyes of the Varkari Council on him. The pressure was immense, yet he did not panic. He observed the beast, noticing its movements and weaknesses. He used the environment to his advantage, leading the creature toward a cluster of jagged rocks where it stumbled slightly. The hunters watched in disbelief as the human maneuvered the massive predator into positions that even their strongest had not managed. Cale's eyes glowed faintly from the shadows. The predator's subtle movements helped Ethan without revealing itself. A fallen branch shifted just as Ethan needed it, causing the alien beast to trip slightly. Another time, Cale's tail created a small diversion, allowing Ethan to move undetected past a dangerous attack. Hours passed, and Ethan continued to demonstrate his cleverness. He avoided direct combat, instead using observation, timing, and the environment to his advantage. The elite hunters began to whisper among themselves, astonished that a human could survive where their strongest warriors struggled. Next came a series of trials testing adaptability. The Varkari had designed traps, pits hidden beneath thin layers of soil, walls of razor-sharp crystals, and narrow passages where only the clever could find safe paths. The hunters leapt, climbed, and ran with power, relying on brute strength. Ethan, by contrast, analyzed every obstacle carefully, finding routes that required balance, timing, and insight rather than sheer force. At one point, Ethan faced a narrow bridge made of shimmering alien crystal suspended over a deep chasm. The hunters crossed it easily with strength and agility. Ethan hesitated. One wrong step and he would plummet into the depths below. He noticed a small crack in the bridge, and an idea struck him. Using a fallen branch, he tested the stability of each crystal, moving slowly, deliberately, and precisely. Inch by inch he crossed the bridge safely, earning a faint, impressed murmur from the council above. The final trial was the most dangerous. A labyrinth of tunnels had been created, filled with moving obstacles, hidden pitfalls, and deadly predators. The elite hunters entered confidently, relying on reflexes and strength to survive. Ethan paused at the entrance, assessing the maze carefully. He remembered Kale's lessons: patience, observation, and subtle guidance. Inside the labyrinth, Ethan moved cautiously, avoiding obvious dangers. He noticed patterns in the obstacles, anticipating when they would shift and using timing to navigate safely. Kale followed silently, occasionally intervening to remove a hazard or block a predator, ensuring Ethan had a chance to survive. Hours later, Ethan emerged from the labyrinth exhausted but unharmed. The Council of Varkari had watched silently, their scorn replaced with astonishment. The human, small and fragile, had survived trials that tested strength, intelligence, and courage beyond what they believed possible. The elite hunters approached, curiosity replacing their initial mockery. One of them, a tall warrior with scars from countless battles, stepped forward. "You survived all of it," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and respect. "No human should have made it, yet here you stand." Ethan nodded, breathing heavily. "I survive by thinking, observing, and adapting. Strength is not everything." Kale emerged from the shadows, his massive form dwarfing even the tallest hunter. The predator's glowing eyes focused on Ethan, and he made a deep, rumbling sound, a tone of approval. The council gasped. Kale, their champion predator, had acknowledged the human's cleverness and resilience. For the first time, the Varkari saw Ethan not as a fragile human, but as a being capable of extraordinary skill and courage. Whispers spread quickly among the council. "The human, he is clever, resilient, worthy of respect." Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and pride. He had survived trials that no human before him had faced. He had proven that intelligence, courage, and observation could rival brute strength. And he had done so with Kale by his side, a silent ally who had shown him the way. The council's leader stepped forward, towering over Ethan. His eyes, sharp and assessing, studied the human closely. "You have survived," he said slowly, "against impossible odds. You have earned attention, perhaps even respect." Ethan nodded, still catching his breath. "I only want to survive," he said. "I do not seek praise, but I will prove that humans can endure, even here." Kale growled softly, a sound of agreement and approval. The predator circled Ethan, then turned to the council, clearly signaling that the human had earned recognition. The Varkari's elite hunters, who had mocked him only hours before, now looked at him with something close to awe. Ethan realized that he had achieved something more than survival. He had begun to break the Varkari's perception of humans. They had scorned him as fragile and weak, but his courage, intelligence, and adaptability had forced them to see the truth. Even the smallest, seemingly weakest beings could overcome incredible challenges. As the twin suns set behind the jagged cliffs, Ethan and Kyle stood side by side. The human's body ached, his clothes torn and dirty, but his spirit was strong. Kale's massive presence beside him was both a comfort and a warning. Danger would always be near, but with intelligence, courage, and the right allies, survival was possible. The Varkari Council slowly dispersed, whispers of astonishment following them. Ethan had not only survived, he had earned respect from the strongest beings on the planet, and in doing so, he had begun a journey that would forever change the way the Varkari viewed humans. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The world was vast, filled with challenges, predators, and dangers yet unseen. But he also knew that he had proven something vital. Survival was not determined solely by size or strength, but by intelligence, courage, and heart. And for the first time, Ethan felt that the impossible might be within his reach. The alien sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the jagged forest. Ethan stood on a rocky cliff, wind whipping his hair across his face. The past days had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. He had survived Kale's trials, outsmarted deadly predators, and faced the Varkari's elite hunters. But he sensed that the greatest challenge was still ahead. A distant roar echoed through the canyon, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Ethan's heart raced. The sound was unlike anything he had heard before, massive, powerful, and terrifying. From the shadows of the forest, a colossal creature emerged, its scales glittering and eyes glowing with deadly intelligence. It was a terror designed by the Varkari themselves, a creature used only for the most dangerous hunts. Ethan instinctively backed away, but Kale stepped forward, massive and imposing. The predator's glowing eyes locked onto the beast, and a low growl vibrated through the clearing. Kale was ready, and Ethan knew he had to trust the predator completely. The elite Varkari hunters who had once mocked him now watched in tense silence. Even they had never seen a human face such a beast and survive. Their surprise turned quickly into curiosity, wondering how Ethan would handle this ultimate threat. Ethan's mind raced. He could not fight the creature with strength, he was far too small. He needed strategy, observation, and patience. He glanced at Kale, drawing courage from the predator's unwavering presence. "All right, Kale," Ethan whispered, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "We do this together," Kyle responded with a deep rumbling growl, his body lowering in a crouch. Ethan noticed that the predator's tail swished with purpose, stirring the dust and leaves almost like a signal. Together they formed a silent, deadly team. The colossal creature lunged first, its claws tearing through the ground where Ethan had just stood. He leapt sideways, narrowly avoiding the attack, and ducked behind a jagged boulder. Kale followed swiftly, intercepting the beast with precise strikes that kept it off balance. The predator did not aim to kill immediately. He was guiding, testing, and protecting. Ethan spotted an idea. The creature's movements were powerful but predictable. Its attacks were fast but lacked cunning. He led it toward a cluster of glowing alien crystals embedded in the rocky cliff. Kale followed, matching Ethan's movements perfectly, creating openings and distractions. Ethan climbed the rocks carefully, noticing cracks and weak points in the cliff. He knew that if he could use the environment, he could even the odds. With Kale engaging the beast, Ethan dislodged a massive crystal, causing it to fall and narrowly miss the creature. The impact stunned the monster momentarily, giving Kale a chance to leap on its back and distract it further. The Varkari hunters watched in stunned silence. A fragile human was directing the battle, predicting the monster's movements and using Kale as both protector and weapon. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Ethan and Kale moved in perfect synchronization. Ethan observed patterns Kale executed with power, and together they gradually wore the massive creature down. It roared again, frustrated and confused, while the human and predator pressed their advantage. Finally, Ethan spotted the opportunity. The creature had trapped itself against a jagged wall of rocks. One wrong step and it would collapse its own footing. He signaled Kale with a small gesture, and the predator understood immediately. With a powerful push, Kale forced the monster to stumble onto the rocks, and the massive body of the creature pinned itself, immobilized. Silence fell over the clearing. Ethan and Kale stood side by side, both breathing heavily. The elite hunters and the Council of Varkari stared in awe. For the first time, a human had faced one of their deadliest creations, survived and even tamed the battle through intelligence, courage, and a bond with a creature far stronger than himself. Kale stepped forward, towering over Ethan and the subdued beast. The predator's glowing eyes softened, and he nudged Ethan gently with his massive head. Then, in a moment that no Varkari would forget, Kale made a deep, resonant sound, a sound that carried across the clearing, filled with respect, recognition, and something extraordinary. A declaration. Kale's growl transformed into a tone that the Varkari recognized as a symbol of family. The hunters gasped, their mouths open in disbelief. The champion predator, feared and revered across the planet, had called the human family. Ethan froze, realizing the significance of the moment. This was more than survival or victory. Kale had accepted him not just as clever or courageous, but as kin. In a world that scorned him for being fragile, this gesture transcended everything. He was no longer just a human struggling to survive. He was part of a bond that could not be broken. The Council of Varkari stepped forward slowly. The leader, imposing and powerful, lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "This human, he is unlike any other," the council leader said. "He has survived, adapted, and proven himself where many of our strongest have failed." And the champion predator, he recognizes him as family. This is extraordinary. The elite hunters who had doubted him now bowed slightly in acknowledgement. Their whispers were filled with admiration. He survived. He outsmarted the monster, with Kale. No human has ever done this before. Perhaps we misjudged them. Ethan looked at Kale, his massive companion, and a sense of warmth filled him. The predator's glowing eyes reflected pride and trust. Kale had not just guided him through survival, he had given him acceptance, recognition, and a place in a world that once scorned him. The human spoke softly, almost to himself. I'm honored, Kale. You called me family. That means more than anything." Kale rumbled in response, a sound that seemed to carry agreement and a promise. Together they stood amidst the clearing, a fragile human and a mighty predator, facing the Varkari Council and elite hunters. The scorn of the past had been replaced with respect, and the impossible had become real. Ethan understood the true lesson of this world. Survival was more than strength or speed. It was courage, intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to form bonds even across the boundaries of species. The Varkari had underestimated humans, assuming fragility meant weakness. Ethan had proven otherwise. In the following days, the story spread throughout the Varkari civilization. The human who had been scorned, who had been dismissed as fragile and weak, was now celebrated for his courage and cleverness. Kaol, their champion predator, had called him family, and that recognition carried more weight than any trial, any battle, or any challenge. Ethan and Kale continued to roam the alien forest together, facing dangers and challenges as a team. The bond between them grew stronger, based on respect, trust, and shared survival. The Varkari learned to see humans in a new light, not as weak but as beings capable of extraordinary resilience and ingenuity. For Ethan, the journey had been transformative. He had arrived as a fragile human, scorned and underestimated. But through cleverness, courage, and the unexpected alliance with Kyle, he had survived every test, outsmarted deadly creatures, and earned a place among the most powerful beings on the planet. And now, with Kale by his side, he was no longer just surviving. He had found family, respect, and the understanding that being fragile did not mean being weak. In a world of predators, power, and danger, Ethan had become something greater, a symbol of human courage, ingenuity, and the ability to rise above the impossible. The twin suns set over the alien horizon, casting golden and silver hues across the jagged cliffs. Ethan stood on the ridge, Kale looming protectively beside him. Together they looked over the forest that had tested them, challenged them, and ultimately brought them together. The scorn of the Varkari was gone. What remained was respect, awe, and the unbreakable bond of family. The story of the fragile human had become legendary. He had survived the impossible, earned the trust of a champion predator, and changed the perception of his species forever. And in that moment, Ethan understood something profound. Family was not just about shared blood or origin. Family could be forged through courage, loyalty, and the willingness to face the impossible together. As night fell, Ethan and Kale returned to their resting place in the forest. The alien stars shone brightly above, reflecting off Kale's scales. Ethan smiled faintly, realizing that he had survived, grown stronger, and found a companion who would always stand with him. In a world that once scorned him, he had become extraordinary. The fragile human was no longer fragile. The predator had called him family, and together they had changed everything.